in the hallowed, often rigid halls of 19th century Vienna, where the nascent science of psychiatry was still finding its footing, Irvin D. Yalom's When Nietzsche Wept masterfully orchestrates a revolutionary therapeutic bond between its two central figures, the esteemed physician Dr. Joseph Breuer and the brooding, intellectually volatile philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. This is no ordinary clinical encounter. It's a profound, often tumultuous, dance of two souls grappling with their own respective agonies, a mutual exploration that shatters the conventional power dynamics of the doctor-patient relationship. At its core, the novel argues that true healing, particularly the existential variety, often demands a reciprocal vulnerability, a blurring of the traditionally sharp lines between healer and healed. From their very first clandestine meeting, orchestrated by the enigmatic Lou Salome, it's clear that this will not be a typical course of treatment. Nietzsche, consumed by despair and crippling physical ailments, initially seeks a cure for his migraines, but Breuer, guided by Salome's astute observation that only a despair could truly afflict him, quickly perceives a deeper, more profound ailment, an existential crisis of epic proportions. Yet, Breuer himself is a man teetering on the precipice of his own emotional abyss, suffocated by the gilded cage of a successful but unfulfilling life and consumed by an obsessive infatuation with former patient Bertha Pappenheim, the real-life Anna O. It is a shared, albeit unspoken, burden of suffering that quietly, almost imperceptibly, begins to forge their unique connection. Yalom, with the precision of a seasoned psychotherapist, illustrates how this therapeutic bond evolves from a guarded professional exchange into something akin to a symphony of shared introspection. Breuer, initially attempting to apply his established talking cure to Nietzsche, soon finds his methods insufficient against the philosopher's formidable intellect and stubborn resistance. The breakthrough comes not through Breuer's conventional techniques, but through his willingness to step off the pedestal of the omniscient physician. He begins to share his own anxieties, his own intellectual frustrations, and crucially, his own haunting obsession with Bertha. This audacious act of self-disclosure is a pivotal moment, transforming the one-sided interrogation into a genuine dialogue. As Breuer confesses his torment, Nietzsche, initially wary, slowly begins to reciprocate, not with medical symptoms, but with the philosophical underpinnings of a profound loneliness and sense of cosmic insignificance. A memorable passage that encapsulates this burgeoning mutuality occurs when Breuer, frustrated by Nietzsche's evasiveness, finally admits his own torment. I told him of my dreams, of my obsession with Bertha, of my fear of the emptiness I felt within, of my dread of dying without truly having lived. This admission is a seismic shift. It's not just a confession. It's an invitation, an offering of his own vulnerability. In response, Nietzsche, almost imperceptibly, begins to lower his own intellectual and emotional defenses. He starts to speak not just of physical pain, but of the deeper philosophical despair that cripples his will to live, his contempt for the common man, his sense of intellectual isolation, his fear of succumbing to the last man's complacency. The therapy becomes a two-way street, a dialectical exchange where both men are simultaneously patient and analyst, student and teacher. This revolutionary therapeutic bond teaches a crucial lesson: that authentic connection, born from mutual vulnerability, is often the most potent catalyst for change. It challenges the notion that a therapist must remain an opaque, dispassionate mirror. Instead, Yalom suggests that true healing can blossom when both parties are willing to shed their masks, to confront their shared human frailties, and to walk together, however haltingly, into the unsettling territory of their existential anxieties. It is in this radical act of relational honesty that both Breuer and Nietzsche find not a cure, perhaps, but a profound shift in perspective, a renewed will confront their lives, and a deeper understanding of themselves. When Nietzsche Wept plunges its readers, alongside a protagonist, into the chilling depths of human despair, confronting the specter of mortality and the relentless, often agonizing, quest for meaning in a seemingly indifferent universe. This is not merely a subplot. It is the very bedrock upon which the novel's narrative and therapeutic journey are built. Both Friedrich Nietzsche and Dr. Joseph Breuer, in their respective struggles, embody different facets of this universal human predicament, forcing us to examine how we grapple with our own finitude, suffering, and the inherent lack of preordained purpose. The book masterfully illustrates that true healing often begins not with an evasion of these existential truths, but with a courageous, head-on confrontation. Nietzsche, a figure already steeped in philosophical nihilism, arrives at Breuer's door consumed by a profound sense of hopelessness, a despair that transcends mere depression. His physical ailments, while real, are amplified by a spiritual malaise stemming from his intellectual isolation and his radical, often bleak, worldview. He is a man who has dared to look directly into the abyss, and in doing so, feels the crushing weight of a meaningless existence. His famous declaration, "God is dead," resonates throughout the narrative, symbolizing not just a theological statement, but the loss of any transcendent framework that might once have provided comfort or inherent purpose. For Nietzsche, without God, humanity is left adrift, burdened with the terrifying freedom of creating its own values in a void. His personal despair is a microcosm of this larger philosophical crisis, a deep-seated fear that his life, his intellect, and his suffering might ultimately amount to nothing. Breuer, on the other hand, embodies a different form of existential dread, one perhaps more relatable to the common person. Despite his professional success, his loving family, and his intellectual prowess, he is haunted by a profound sense of unfulfillment and the encroaching shadow of death. His obsession with Bertha Pappenheim is not just a romantic entanglement. It's a desperate clinging to a fleeting moment of intense, authentic feeling, a stark contrast of comfortable but stagnant routine of his life. He fears that he is dying without truly having lived, a sentiment that speaks of the terror of a life unexamined, a potential unfulfilled. His midlife crisis is an existential awakening, a sudden, terrifying awareness of his limited time and the choices he has not made. As Breuer grapples with his internal turmoil, he repeatedly returns to thoughts of his own mortality, recognizing that the very awareness of death gives urgency to his desire for a more authentic existence. He begins to see how his carefully constructed life, while providing comfort, has also served as a shield against the deeper questions of his own being. The therapeutic process in When Nietzsche Wept becomes a shared journey into this existential darkness. Breuer's innovative talking cure morphs into a dialogue about the fundamental conditions of human existence. They discuss loneliness, the burden of freedom, the inevitability of death, and the challenge of finding meaning in a world devoid of inherent purpose. It is through this direct engagement with these ultimate concerns, as Yalom often calls them in his nonfiction work, that both men begin to find a path forward. Nietzsche is pushed by Breuer to confront his intellectual arrogance and the self-imposed isolation that exacerbates his despair. Breuer, in turn, is challenged by Nietzsche's radical honesty to confront his own avoidance and embrace the frightening truth of his desires. One poignant moment that illustrates his confrontation with the abyss occurs when Breuer, reflecting on Nietzsche's suffering, realizes a profound connection between despair and the denial of life's ultimate facts. He observes that Nietzsche was like a man standing on a precipice, staring into the void of his own insignificance. Yet, it is in this very act of staring into the void that the possibility of finding solid ground emerges. By articulating their fears, by sharing their anxieties about their limited time and the potential meaninglessness of their efforts, they begin to construct collaboratively new frameworks for living. The book doesn't offer easy answers or miraculous cures. Instead, it provides a powerful testament to the idea that by embracing the tragic elements of existence, death, despair, and the weight of freedom, one can paradoxically unlock a deeper appreciation for life and a more authentic, self-generated sense of meaning. It's a compelling argument that true peace comes not from escaping these truths, but from integrating them into the very fabric of one's being and the intricate tapestry of When Nietzsche Wept. The seemingly universal and often romanticized emotion of love is presented as a complex, often perilous force, easily morphing into obsession and forging the very chains that bind his characters. Irvin D. Yalom delves into the psychological depth of human attachment, exposing how desire, when unexamined or unfulfilled, can become a source of profound suffering and a formidable obstacle to personal freedom. The novel intricately weaves together multiple narratives of infatuation and unhealthy devotion, revealing the subtle ways in which individuals can become imprisoned by their own desires and the arduous, often painful, journey toward liberation. At the heart of this exploration lies Dr. Joseph Breuer's consuming obsession with Bertha Pappenheim, the brilliant and enigmatic patient known as Anna O. in the annals of psychoanalysis. Breuer, despite his ostensibly happy marriage and successful career, finds himself irresistibly drawn to Bertha, haunted by her intellect and her vivid, almost hallucinatory symptoms. His love for her transcends professional admiration, evolving into a near-delusional infatuation that threatens to unravel his life. This is not a healthy, reciprocal affection, but a pathological clinging, a desperate attempt to fill an unacknowledged void within himself. Bertha represents not just a patient, but a potent symbol of excitement, intellectual challenge, and perhaps a passion he feels is lacking in his own existence. His inability to detach from his fantasy paralyses him, creating a profound conflict between his desires and his duties, a psychological chain that he desperately needs to break free from. The irony is poignant. Breuer, the healer, is himself ensnared by an emotional illness stemming from his own unexamined passions. Parallel to Breuer's plight is a less overt, but equally binding, obsession of Friedrich Nietzsche with Salome. While their relationship in the novel is primarily intellectual and manipulative on Salome's part, Nietzsche's intense yearning for her intellectual companionship and emotional validation clearly crosses into the territory of obsession. He idealizes her, projecting onto her the image of an ideal companion, and muse, refusing to see her for who she truly is, an independent and intellectually ambitious woman with her own agenda. His despair is not solely philosophical. It is deeply intertwined with his rejection by Salome and a perceived inability to form meaningful, reciprocal connections. Nietzsche's struggle with profound loneliness is exacerbated by his inability to detach from the idea of what Salome represents to him, highlighting how even intellectual giants can be humbled by the sheer force of unrequited or idealized affection. His desperate pleas for her attention and his subsequent spiral into deeper despair illustrate the psychological chains forged by an unfulfilled longing for connection, particularly when that longing becomes an all-consuming focus. Yalom skillfully uses Breuer's internal monologues and therapeutic sessions with Freud to dissect the nature of these obsessions. Breuer's talking cure on himself, guided by Freud's early insights, reveals that his obsession with Bertha is a displacement of deeper anxieties and unfulfilled needs within his own life, specifically his boredom with his domesticity and his fear of an unlived life. He is not truly in love with Bertha, but with the escape and intensity she represents. The novel implies that these chains are not external impositions, but self-forged psychological constructs. We create our own prisons of desire when we refuse to acknowledge our deeper needs and the true motivations behind our attachments. A particularly powerful realization for Breuer comes when he begins to understand that his love for Bertha is a psychological mechanism, a symptom. Yalom writes through Breuer's internal monologue. He had built a shrine of Bertha inside himself, a shrine he could visit when the world outside felt dull and gray. This passage perfectly encapsulates the nature of obsession as a retreat from reality, a self-created illusion. The path to breaking these chains, as both Breuer and, to a lesser extent, Nietzsche discover, lies in radical self-honesty, confrontation with uncomfortable truths, and the willingness to relinquish idealized fantasies in favor of genuine, albeit imperfect, reality. The novel suggests that true freedom comes not from finding the perfect object of love, but from understanding the self and discerning the underlying needs that drive such intense, often destructive, attachments. It is a profound exploration of how our most fervent desires can, ironically, become our greatest psychological impediments. When Nietzsche Wept stands as a testament to the radical notion that wisdom, far from being a mere academic pursuit, can serve as a potent path to psychological healing. Irvin D. Yalom seamlessly weaves Friedrich Nietzsche's profound philosophical ideas into the very fabric of the therapeutic process, transforming abstract concepts into practical tools for self-discovery and transformation. The novel argues that confronting the grand questions of existence, purpose, suffering, freedom, and death is not just an intellectual exercise, but a vital component of mental well-being, offering a unique philosophical prescription when traditional medical approaches fall short. Dr. Joseph Breuer, initially a proponent of the burgeoning talking cure and the rational scientific method, soon discovers that Nietzsche's despair cannot be remedied by simple diagnosis or conventional psychological techniques. Nietzsche's illness is not merely neurotic. It is existential, deeply rooted in his philosophical convictions, and his perception of a universe devoid of inherent meaning. This forces Breuer to transcend his medical training and engage with Nietzsche on his own intellectual battlefield. The therapy transforms from a doctor-patient interview into a dialectical exchange where philosophical insights become the medium of healing. Instead of prescribing medication, Breuer finds himself metaphorically prescribing philosophical challenges, urging Nietzsche to apply his own radical wisdom to his personal suffering. A prime example of his philosophical prescription in action is Breuer's persistent push for Nietzsche to embrace his own concept of amor fati, the love of one's fate. Nietzsche, the philosopher who coined this profound idea, struggles immensely to apply it to his own life, riddled with chronic pain, intellectual isolation, and a crushing sense of personal failure. Breuer subtly, yet relentlessly, guides Nietzsche toward confronting this hypocrisy. He challenges him to accept his suffering, not as a meaningless affliction, but as an integral part of his unique destiny, necessary for his philosophical development. This isn't about passive resignation. It's about a radical affirmation of life in its entirety, including its hardships. Breuer knows that if Nietzsche can truly embody his own philosophy, he might find the inner strength to overcome his debilitating despair. Another key philosophical concept brought to the fore is Nietzsche's idea of the eternal recurrence of the same. While a terrifying prospect for many, the idea that one might relive one's life an infinite number of times, exactly as it is, Breuer uses his thought experiment to challenge Nietzsche's regrets and his paralysis. If every moment, every choice, every suffering were to recur eternally, would one live differently? This thought experiment becomes a powerful lens through which both men examine their lives, forcing them to confront their deepest regrets and the ways in which they have evaded authenticity. For Breuer, this means confronting his yearning for Bertha and his unlived desires, prompting him to make active choices rather than passively endure. For Nietzsche, it forces him to consider the weight of his own existence and the importance of living each moment with profound intention, rather than succumbing to the spirit of gravity. Yalom vividly illustrates how these philosophical insights are not just discussed, but internalized and applied. There's a powerful scene where Breuer urges Nietzsche, what if you were to consider your disease, your headaches, your vomiting as necessary for your unique perspective? This is more than a question. It's a therapeutic intervention deeply rooted in Nietzsche's own philosophy of suffering as a catalyst for greatness. It challenges the very notion of what constitutes illness and cure. The healing process becomes less about eliminating symptoms and more about integrating them into a meaningful existence. Ultimately, when Nietzsche Wept makes a compelling case that a truly comprehensive approach to mental well-being must engage with profound philosophical questions that underpin human suffering. It suggests that by wrestling with concepts like purpose, responsibility, and the acceptance of one's fate, individuals can develop a deeper understanding of themselves and cultivate the inner resources necessary to navigate life's inevitable challenges. Wisdom, in Yalom's rendering, is not just about knowing. It's about living authentically, making it an indispensable component of the therapeutic journey and a true path to healing that I end when Nietzsche wept. While the central narrative spotlights the psychological struggles of two prominent men, Irvin D, Yalom subtly yet powerfully illuminates the complex position of women in 19th century society, revealing their quiet power, formidable intellect, and the suffocating societal constraints that often push them to the margins. Through characters like Lou Salome and Mathilde Breuer, the novel not only critiques the patriarchal norms of the era, but also demonstrates how these women, despite their limited overt agency, profoundly influence the psychological journeys of male protagonists, often serving as catalysts for their deepest insights and transformations. Lou Salome stands as the most striking embodiment of a woman pushing against the boundaries of her time. Portrayed as intellectually brilliant, fiercely independent, and unconventional, she defies the demure expectations placed upon women. Her decision to approach Dr. Breuer with a fabricated story of Nietzsche's suicidal despair is a testament to her agency and strategic intellect. She is not merely an object of desire for Nietzsche, nor a passive recipient of male genius. She is a provocateur, a manipulator, and a keen psychological observer in her own right. Her intellect challenges Nietzsche's misogynistic views and Breuer's conventional thinking. She understands a man's psychological vulnerabilities with an astuteness that often surpasses their own self-awareness. Her very presence and her refusal to conform to their expectations forces both men to confront their illusions and biases. A key moment highlighting Salome's influence occurs when she dissects Nietzsche's character with chilling precision, advising Breuer on how to cure him by appealing to his deepest fears rather than his physical ailments. He fears losing his independence more than he fears death, she tells Breuer, offering a psychological insight that Breuer, with all his medical training, had missed. This demonstrates not only her sharp analytical mind, but also her indirect power. She operates in the margins, orchestrating events and providing crucial insights that enable the central therapeutic dynamic to unfold. Her independent thought and ambition, particularly her desire to pursue an intellectual life outside the confines of marriage, were revolutionary for a time and are presented as both admirable and, for men around her, deeply unsettling. Then there's Mathilde Breuer, Dr. Breuer's wife. At first glance, she appears to be the quintessential Victorian wife, devoted, domestic, and seemingly content. However, Yalom gradually unveils her quiet strength and profound depth of her emotional intelligence. While Breuer is consumed by his obsession with Bertha and his midlife crisis, Mathilde maintains the stability of their home and subtly guides her husband, often with a wisdom he fails to fully appreciate. She represents the unacknowledged emotional labor and resilience of women who, despite being confined to domestic spheres, often possessed a grounded pragmatism that their intellectual male counterparts lacked. Her patience, her enduring love, and her capacity for forgiveness are depicted not as weaknesses, but as sources of immense strength that ultimately help anchor Breuer through his personal turmoil. A poignant illustration of Mathilde's often overlooked power comes when she calmly confronts Breuer about his strange behavior, suggesting he is ill. She does so not with anger or accusation, but with a deep, unsettling intuition that cuts through his elaborate self-deception. Her quiet persistence and unwavering presence ultimately provide the safe harbor for Breuer's eventual recovery from his obsession. She embodies a pillar of stability that allows her husband the freedom to descend into his own psychological abyss and eventually find his way back. Through these women, Yalom critiques the societal structures that limited their opportunities, but celebrates their inherent power and intellect. They exist in a world where their contributions were often relegated to the background, yet their influence is undeniably profound. When Nietzsche Wept suggests that the men's journeys towards self-understanding are inextricably linked to the women in their lives, not as passive muses, but as active, intelligent forces who, from their marginal positions, subtly or directly challenge, provoke, and ultimately facilitate their growth. The novel thus serves as a powerful reminder of the unsung strength and unacknowledged wisdom of women operating within the strictures of a patriarchal society. When Nietzsche Wept offers a profoundly insightful and ultimately humanizing look into the inner world of therapists, challenging the long-held notion that the healer stands impervious and detached from the very human conditions they seek to alleviate. Irvin D. Yalom masterfully portrays Dr. Joseph Breuer not as a stoic, all-knowing medical authority, but as a complex, deeply flawed individual wrestling with his own significant existential and personal crises. The novel's genius lies in revealing that even those dedicated to healing others are themselves profoundly entangled in the universal complexities of the human condition, making the therapeutic relationship a two-way street of discovery and vulnerability. From the outset, Breuer is presented as a man of great professional standing, admired and respected, a pioneer of the talking cure. Yet, beneath this polished exterior, he is a man tormented. His obsession with his former patient, Bertha Pappenheim, Anna O., consumes his thoughts, casts a shadow over his marriage, and ultimately leads him to seek help from the young Sigmund Freud. This personal torment is not incidental to plot. It is central to his ability to connect with and, paradoxically, to truly help Nietzsche. Breuer's own anguish becomes a bridge that allows him to understand the philosopher's despair on a deeper, more empathetic level. He is not just observing Nietzsche's suffering. He is experiencing a parallel version of it, albeit from a different source. Yalom skillfully highlights Breuer's internal struggle through vivid internal monologues and his nascent sessions with Freud. Breuer's confession to Freud about his infatuation and his feelings of inadequacy and unfulfillment reveals the vulnerability inherent in the healer's role. "I am dying without truly having lived," Breuer laments, echoing a sentiment that could easily be Nietzsche's own. This shared sense of existential dread, of unlived possibilities and looming mortality, becomes the unacknowledged bond between the two men. It underscores Yalom's belief that a therapist's effectiveness is not diminished by their own struggles, but rather enhanced by their capacity for self-awareness and empathy born from personal experience. A pivotal moment illustrating the wounded healer archetype occurs when Breuer, desperate to break through Nietzsche's resistance, takes the radical step of revealing his own painful obsession with Bertha. This act of unprecedented self-disclosure shatters the traditional therapeutic facade. Breuer's vulnerability is not a weakness. It is a profound act of courage that invites Nietzsche to reciprocate. This blurring of roles, the doctor becoming a patient, the patient becoming an unwitting therapist, is what ultimately propels their joint journey of self-discovery. Breuer's willingness to be seen as imperfect, as struggling, as human, is what allows Nietzsche to finally drop his own intellectual defenses and confront his deeper anxieties. Yalom profoundly argues that authenticity, not clinical detachment, is a cornerstone of effective therapy. The novel subtly suggests that Breuer's journey with Nietzsche is as much about Breuer's own healing as it is about Nietzsche's. Through the process of trying to cure Nietzsche, Breuer is forced to confront his own psychological demons. Nietzsche's philosophical challenges, his unflinching honesty, and his refusal to accept easy answers push Breuer to examine his own life, his choices, and his desires with new, uncomfortable clarity. By delving into Nietzsche's despair about freedom, choice, and meaning, Breuer is compelled to confront these very same issues within himself. Ultimately, When Nietzsche Wept provided a powerful and compassionate portrait of the therapist as a human being first and foremost. It reminds us that empathy is cultivated through shared experience, and that the capacity to heal often stems from one's own encounter with brokenness. Breuer's journey is a testament to the idea that the greatest insights can emerge not from detached observation, but from the courageous willingness of the healer to acknowledge their own wounds and to engage in the messy, often painful, dance of shared humanity.